And we're live. Right. Pale, male, and stale. These are the words usually levelled at Brexiteers. My two guests I have here, two you can definitely not accuse them of being like that whatsoever. That is the lovely Alice Grant and Beatrice Grant. How you doing, guys?
Thank you for having us on your Kipper stream.
Yeah, awesome. And obviously, I can't go without introducing Sebastian. So, Sebastian Cheek, a fellow YI member, the youth wing of UKIP, and also our treasurer. How you doing?
So am I stale by implication? Because you only said two.
Well, what do you think, guys? Is he stale?
Well, it's funny. on the last stream, Richard was asking how old I was, and I said guess, and then I said I was 21. And he goes, "Life hasn't been kind to you." I was so insulted, I really was. But it's quite funny, to be fair, so I let him off.
I think all of us challenge the stereotypes that people into politics are usually old, which is great.
No, I think that's a really good observation. I think for a number of reasons. Like the amount of half the pieces which involve the two of you are, look what they're doing, isn't it wonderful? And then the other half is, what are they doing? Why would two lovely ladies be wasting their time? How dare they,
Well, just to set some context, actually. So me and Sebastian met you two, I think it was about a couple of weeks ago, at a little do that Sargon put together. And I thought it was quite interesting. I think you said, Beatrice, you were actually the first one who sort of really caught on to politics in a big way. And yeah, I thought, and that's quite interesting because you're the younger one as well, right?
Yeah, I am. I'm 15.
15, yeah, and Alice, you're 17, obviously. So
this was writing large paragraphs on Facebook at the time we still had Facebook about
really
what is.
So do you want to tell us a bit about that, Beatrice? How you sort of became involved in politics or politically aware?
Well, I really just started with talking to people my age about Brexit and why it's in the best interest for our country. And then I just started getting more into politics, and then Alice took politics for A-level, so we both had that in interest.
And we started going to Leave rallies with Nigel and hearing him speak in person, and also we found videos on YouTube of him speaking to the European Parliament. We thought he was so brave and so incredible and courageous and standing up for our nation when everyone else was just laughing and being so rude. And I think that's when we realised that it's imperative we leave the EU and pursue a prosperous future.
Absolutely.
So how long ago?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
How long ago would that have been where you first sort of started getting interested?
I think it was around last year, so quite recently. And then we started going outside Parliament protesting, and we met lots of amazing people there.
And Beatrice, you said you started by sort of talking to people your age about their views on Brexit. That was, I guess you could say, before you were politically active. What was the sort of average opinion that you were getting? Was it excessively pro-EU, as I imagine it would be, or I mean, give us a flavour.
Actually, a year ago, more of the people my age were Remain, and now they're a lot more open to Brexit, really. Because when I used to talk to people, they were very Remain, very pro-Remain.
There was a lot
quite stubborn, towards me. But actually, now talking to people my age, I think they do see that,
I think they realise that it's Brexit is not what's in crisis; it's actually democracy.
Exactly.
And more people are starting to think, I don't agree with the vote, but we voted to leave as a nation, and it hasn't happened yet. So there's something wrong.
Well, what do you think is like the next way out of it? Because you've got a million choices. You've got revoke the whole thing. You've got second referendum. You've got no deal. You've got some sort of a deal. What do you sort of see naturally happening next?
Well, we both think that we should leave October 31st without a deal. And we need someone with courage and conviction to lead our nation, which at the moment is not.
So how did you first start getting involved with the Brexit Party?
Well, it sort of just gradually happened.
We just attended lots of rallies.
And you sort of said Sorry, I think Damien's mum's asking him to tidy his
yeah.
room or something. This is rather embarrassing. One thing I wanted to sort of segue and lead on to is you were talking about the direction the country's going forward. Obviously, what we have to talk about in the sort of week's news would be the Tory leadership election. So who are you sort of leaning towards? Where do you see yourself? If you were a Tory, which I can't imagine you are, either of you, who would you be voting for?
But obviously, since the 29th of March, no way. And so it's become so apparent that the Conservative Party are hardly conservative, and they've basically betrayed all of their voters who are true conservatives. And true conservatism is about national identity, which has been abandoned by the Conservative Party. And also, historically, the people who are most conservative are class, which also have been betrayed by the Tory Party.
Absolutely. So who do you think sort of naturally should, of the, I think it's 7 left, it must be 7, but no, but Hancock just pulled out, so it's 6. Of the 6 that are still in the race, who excites you the most? Is it Rory Stewart? Is it Boris Johnson? I mean, what do you lean towards at the moment?
Well, I think the next Prime Minister is going to be Boris Johnson. So we have to sort of
get behind him.
Well, it's just, I don't really trust any of them. Definitely not Jeremy Hunt or David or Rory Stewart. And if it's between Rob and Johnson, well, I guess because Johnson's more popular, it's probably going to be him.
Okay, but that's who it probably will be. Who would you like it to be?
Well, I would have loved if Mark Francois, Steve Baker, Owen Paterson or Priti Patel or Andrea Jenkins stood for Tory leadership candidate, but they didn't.
Do you not like Dominic Raab?
Well, he did, an honourable thing by resigning from Brexit negotiator due to May's WA.
But then he voted for her withdrawal agreement. So really, we can't really trust somebody who doesn't stand strong for their convictions and everything.
Yeah, I mean that's something you see quite a bit in the Tory party. I mean, the principles matter, and if you can afford to stand on principle, then do. But at the end of the day, it's the party, and you've seen this for decades now in the Tory party. It's survival of the party, basically screw the country. If you look at how we got in this mess in the first place with the '92 Maastricht Treaty, I think it was who's the chap I'm thinking of?
The moment we entered the common market.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a lie. That was deceit. Telling everyone we were joining a common market whilst they all knew that this was about political integration.
Yeah.
And I think people started to realise the loss of sovereignty. Yes, as you say, with the Maastricht Treaty, when suddenly we had a wave of mass immigration. And I think that's when people started to realise that we had no power to change that. It doesn't matter how much they complain and how much politicians promise. We have absolutely no power within the European Union. And I think that's why leaving, the most important decision, or the most important reason why we want to leave, is that we can become masters of our own destiny and take back control of our future.
See, a lot of countries have natural barriers that stop their own constitution being changed. So, for example, Ireland, if their constitution gets changed, there has to be a referendum. A lot of countries don't. That's why Ireland, I believe, or maybe it was the Netherlands, got a vote on the Maastricht Treaty, and I think they voted against it. Daniel Hannan, say it again, sorry?
Votes are always ignored with the EU.
Well, there you go, exactly. I mean, the amount of votes which have been either completely ignored. Sorry?
Yeah. Happening to us right now.
Well, exactly, yeah. I
love that teacup, by the way. That's brilliant.
We as a country have never voted on the political aspect. We voted on the common market, and yes, I do think that was dubious because it was always going to be a political union. But when it became a political union in '92, we never had a vote on that, and we didn't have a vote on it for what 24 years, and finally we get it. And the amount of sovereignty we gave up. I mean, the point about parliamentary democracy is the powers are not given to the MPs, they're leased. And when the MP's job is done, they give it back.
Sovereignty of this country ultimately rests with us, the people. And our MPs, our elected representatives, are supposed to keep that and protect it, not give it away to some supranational organisation who don't believe in democracy, and almost everything they do goes against our British values and our constitution. And, ECJ courts, they don't understand our social fabric. They don't understand our nation. Honestly, it's quite shocking.
Yeah, this is something you talk about. It's actually in your bio on your Twitter, how we're a country of different cultures and languages and things like that. and how we can't just be this homogenous block. And that's very much like what I think, basically, why, you know, each of these countries are so different. You can't just mash them all together and expect them to work. Greece's economy is obviously so different to Germany's economy. And
ultimately, the globalist aim is to destroy culture and to destroy diversity. They are the ones who don't believe in diversity. We're the ones who enjoy other cultures, and we think other cultures are great. You know, it makes life so much more interesting. And we believe that our culture should be protected as everyone else's. But that's not what the globalists believe.
And smashing all the different cultures to create one monoculture is ridiculous. I mean, you don't go on holiday to France and eat all your meals at McDonald's, do you? You go to the local cuisine, you go to the boulangerie, you do this, you enjoy yourself, you know? You don't just have the same thing everywhere you go, because why go anywhere, you know? And that's what I think the aim of a lot of globalism is. It's to create a completely homogenous block across the world. And I think by the time that the majority of people realize that, it could be too late. So that's why I think the sort of resurgence that you're seeing within Europe of parties saying, look, we need to stand up for our national identity, I think it, you know, couldn't come soon enough.
That's so true. That's why, the backlash against this takeover of the European countries that the EU has mounted, you know, can be seen all over across Europe, because people are so angry that they've been lied to, and that, you know, the truth is, with this mass immigration and everything, their culture and their national identity has been eroded by the EU. So I completely understand that anger. It's the same thing here. 2016 was a populist revolution.
Absolutely. God, we're going to have to find some things we disagree on here, aren't we?
Well, I mean, the obvious one is, but both of you are very attached to the Brexit Party, and I guess you can imagine that me and Damien are quite attached to UKIP at the moment. Where do you see the distinction? Obviously, at the end of the day, with a lot of things, or rather with the main thing, we are allies. We both want Brexit at the end of the day. That's what we care about. And we may disagree with people joining and leaving. We may disagree with some of the other policies. But the main thing is we need to leave the EU. So why for you, I don't know if you're subscribers of the Brexit Party, but why do you err towards that than UKIP at the moment?
Well, I think at the moment, Nigel's Brexit Party is what's going to allow us, is what's going to put pressure on Parliament to deliver Brexit, because it's such a huge threat to, you know, the status quo with these two main parties who basically serve nothing but themselves. And we really believe in Nigel as well. He's such an amazing politician, and he's really devoted his life to this cause. 20 years ago, you know, he had a stable job, and he gave all that up to pursue, you know, what was then fringe politics, which was the EU and the European question. So he's a man of integrity, and, you know, if anything, what he's done has shown that. So.
Well, I would just like to make a quick comment there, actually, because
oh no,
no, because I get questions about you know, why have UKIP? You know, we didn't perform very well in the European elections, obviously. What's been, you know, our lessening in popularity? And I would say that is entirely Nigel Farage. Whether you like it or not, Nigel Farage is the face of Brexit. And people are always going to look to a leader and someone who's strong like him as someone to guide them. And so it's no surprise to me that the Brexit Party have done so fantastically well. It's mostly down to Nigel, in my opinion. Would you echo that yourselves?
Yeah, no, that's very true. He's an excellent speaker, and he really inspires passion. He's what inspired me at first. So.
And the momentum is really with you guys at the moment, that's for sure. You didn't quite get that Peterborough seat, but you were awfully close to getting it. And the amount of votes you took in that election was actually astonishing for such a young party.
So proud of everyone who supported, and the Brexit Party, and Mike Green as well. He's such an amazing candidate. And it's a real shame, especially since then, Lisa Forbes hasn't been.
Yeah. Don't worry. Yeah, we know what you're trying to say. Damien, I mean, it's very interesting what you say, because I think it came out today or maybe yesterday that there are 5 different investigations going on to the Peterborough election count. There are 5 different cases of suspected fraud, which, I mean, 1 is enough to have an outrage. I mean, 5 is ridiculous. I mean, you must have seen the photo going around online. A convicted electoral fraudster was at the count celebrating with the Labour Party, and I mean, this is a clown world, isn't it? I mean, it's ridiculous.
So dodgy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think you know, at first I was accepting of the result, but now I'm starting to think that there could have been fraudulent activity, and if so, we need to investigate it. Because it does seem quite odd. Brexit Party, we were doing so well. The public, you know, was so.
And when we went out giving out leaflets, so many people were showing their support for the Brexit Party.
Yeah, the response was amazing. So.
Well, I actually remember when Nigel Farage was in UKIP and he stood for Parliament, there was actually proven fraud against Nigel Farage by the Conservatives, who basically used funds which they weren't really supposed to use, extra funds to be able to support their campaign. I think they were bussing in Conservatives from around the country just to really attack Farage as much as possible. But there were. Sorry, no, you go on.
Did you hear about those billboards that have overspent incredible amount of money, and they were the ones that were basically targeting Farage and.
No,
was this when Farage was in UKIP?
No, it was those. It was really recently. There were these tweets that. Did you see them?
No. What were they?
I think the Twitter is led by donkeys. It's just. And yeah, basically they spent hundreds of thousands of pounds in a campaign to specifically attack Farage and other leading Brexiteers. Yeah, they actually stalked our march as well with their billboards.
Right, that's dodgy. See, I like the idea of the Brexit Party, and I thought it was absolutely fundamental that the Leave force had a voice in the European elections, because if UKIP kept going the way it was going, where it was only getting 10% of the polls, that was not going to be enough. You needed somebody who was charismatic, somebody who could get the message out, and who's done this a million times, and that person was Nigel Farage. And so, to be honest, thank you for doing that, because when you woke up on a few days after, and you got the results from the European elections, it basically said Brexit won, and that's what we needed. That's what we needed. The problem.
Brexit.
Say it again, sorry.
I said an undisputable win for the Brexit Party.
Absolutely. So this is what I said to you both actually in Richmond. I got into the party purely because I didn't like the way my country was going. I didn't have any necessarily allegiance to UKIP or whatever, and I guess I do now, but. I'll say this, and this is where I mentioned it earlier with the Tory party and their cold allegiance to the survival of their party. I honestly don't mind if UKIP was completely destroyed and never heard of again, so long as the things that I care passionately about were upheld. If we got our sovereignty back, if we left the EU, if we had a fairer tax system, if we took care of our people, if we rebuilt our military, if we took care of our veterans, if we did all these things
and cut down immigration.
And of course, cut it down to reasonable levels, then... Yeah. Exactly, but so many Tories I find, and I've said this before to you, so this will be repetition. So many Tories I find, it's great if they get their policies in, and that's a bonus and a cherry on top. But the main thing is their party stays in, and that's where the country comes below power. Exactly.
So why has there been this vacuum of morals in the Conservative Party? Do you think, Sebastian?
Well. When it's ruthless ambition, when you have one aim, which is to stay in power, and when you're in a game which is as dirty as politics is, and it can be, and you only have to look to America to see how dirty politics can get, when you have that situation where what's on the line is your ability to control the country for 5 years. When you have that on the line, you're willing to do anything. You will do whatever it takes to get that position. And that's where they're willing to put aside their morals for a bit. And I'm not saying they're completely, without morals. And I'm certainly not saying all Conservatives or even all MPs. But a lot of the time, the leadership goes, is this wrong? And then second, are we going to get caught? And that's the main thing. And that applies to so many policies.
Yeah, I was going to say,
absolutely.
The Party is the pro-EU party of the UK. They were always in the EPP, which is the European People's Party of Europe, and they only left that in 2015. And also, they no longer stand by conservative values at all.
So here's a question for you. Would you rather see the Conservatives elect an absolutely hopeless candidate like Rory Stewart, in my opinion, and just totally disappear, and the Brexit Party replace them, or would you prefer them to elect a really good Brexiteer who will actually give us more chance of Brexit? I know it's a bit of a difficult one. I can tell you my opinion is that I'm actually quite keen for the Tories to just be annihilated for history.
No, I think the collapse of the Conservative Party will come. The thing is that Brexit is so important to me that I really want to see us leave on the 31st of October, no matter what. That is, my number one wish. And
that's
what I've been fighting for.
If Rory Stewart
yeah, for sure. Or we'd get, Brexit in name only with no deal.
Do you think the Conservatives are beyond saving now? They're just too far gone?
Sure, far beyond redemption.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, at the moment they're trying to pursue a disastrous environmental policy, and they're going to ruin, British icon, which is our beautiful countryside, our landscape with wind turbines and destroying valleys with high-speed railways.
And the wind turbines actually jack up the prices for the poorest people massively. So they're really terrible. If you care about poor people, it's not a good move.
Yeah. And also, if you're any type of environmentalist, you should hate them. The amount of birds that are killed by those things. And I'm not talking like a seagull every few weeks flies near it and damages its wing. Every day, tens of birds are killed by one turbine load. It's ridiculous,
Yeah, not only that, but plastic pollution is what's really tangible and actually affecting wildlife and animals. But instead they're trying to stop climate change,
which is something that the average person can't change. And instead of peddling all this climate change sort of propaganda, they should be actually tackling talking about things that we can tackle as people, like cutting out the amount of plastic that we use on a daily basis instead.
And taking up things like nuclear power as well instead, because it's more effective, in my opinion.
Well,
are you not pro nuclear power?
Yeah.
That's fair enough. You don't have to have an opinion on everything.
I think, well, I don't know. I'm quite skeptical after Chernobyl and Fukushima. We do have.
Oh, okay. We have some work to do, Sebastian.
Well, all I'll say is this, and I only care about energy because it means I get cheaper Bitcoin mining prices. So that's all I really care about. But the Chernobyl thing, I mean, it was made in, what was it, like a fourth world country, a Soviet Union country with
Ukraine.
Very, very dirty produce. Sorry?
Radiation is still very dangerous to people that work around it and animals, and I don't know, it's very frightening, I think.
Yeah, but my sort of view, and I think the reason France does it so much is so long as you don't build it on a tectonic plate, which was Japan's big problem, and so long as you put all the regulations in place, it can be absolutely okay. The problem is the toxic waste, which, as far as I know, can't be dealt with. That is a genuine problem. But if you want cheap renewable energy, I think nuclear is the best way to go.
Yeah.
Well, so I want to talk about, you mentioned the Brexit Party. It's my understanding that at the moment they don't have a manifesto, and I think that will be, unfortunately, a bit of the downfall of the Brexit Party, because I think you've got all this momentum and you're doing brilliantly.
Can I just say I disagree with that, because I don't think the average person on the street really cares. Oh, what's in your manifesto?
Well, they care what you stand for, don't they?
I guess so. Well, what do you think?
Well, they are coming up with policies, and they're doing it a different way, which is they're going to send out, I think, some sort of questionnaire to all its supporters and us, and then form policy from the bottom to the top. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I think we could be seeing some really interesting policies.
I think that's really admirable, and to be honest, that's the way it should go. It should be, what do your members actually want? And so long as you're very fixated on who your members can be and you don't have infiltrators like what happened with Jeremy Corbyn, then that's fantastic. The problem I have is some of the candidates that the Brexit Party has got forward at the moment, you've got Anne Widdecombe on one side and then Claire Fox, who, to my understanding, is a literal communist. I can't understand how you'd put forward a policy which they both agree on. Because even if the members vote and it's democratic, Claire Fox is not going to argue for lowering taxation and building up the military, and Anne Widdecombe's not going to, vote for and campaign for, anti-social conservative issues. So I don't know how you'll keep everybody together. What's your sort of view on that?
Well, it is going to be difficult to please people from, complete opposite sides of the political spectrum, but I think it can be done because ultimately we're all united by one thing, which is love for our country and for democracy and freedom, and that's really the most important thing. So I'm sure everything will work itself out.
So do you think the Brexit Party will have, things to say in a future beyond Brexit? Once, say, Brexit is implemented and it's implemented well, what does the Brexit Party stand for after that?
Well, we stand for democracy, and obviously there are no policies yet to scrutinise. But I really trust Farage. I think he cares about our civil liberties, and once we're out of the EU, we will actually be able to start solving all the problems that we've seen in the past few decades. Starting with reviving British industry such as the steel industry, and one thing that I really love about Farage is that also he's a great supporter of small and medium-sized British businesses, and
absolutely
probably introduce a bit of protectionism, which I think is definitely needed in our economy, as well as he is a free trade marketer. He does free trade, and also our fishing industry will be renewed once we've left the EU, which I'm really looking forward to because I think what's happened to the fishermen has been unbelievable. And
I mean, you've seen it firsthand, haven't you? I mean, you were up in, was it Grimsby, or when you did your march, you must have gone through so many fishing towns.
Yeah, it was incredible. We talked to so many people from all over the country when we were marching down, and it's incredible how much people, feel so betrayed by the fact that we're not going to, they haven't left yet.
Well, I actually have first-hand experience of this because I actually
work. A fisherman, did you, Damien?
I actually work in a chippy on weekends.
Right, okay, fair enough.
Chippy geezer, they call me actually.
That's embarrassing.
And funnily enough, I remember when they showed you the introducing forms, and it said that basically all their fish was fished in Iceland, and basically none of it was fished in Britain whatsoever. And I have no doubt that this is because Iceland is not in the EU and Britain is in the EU, which means we have to chuck lots of our fish away and we can't fish in certain areas.
Talking about ecological disasters, the EU has inflicted the absolute worst on the planet. And, it's not helped by the fact they've got over 30,000 corporatist lobbies, and they only really care after the multinationals and the corporations, which Farage is actually very much against corporatism. So,
I mean, absolutely, they've taken away a large swathe of our political, our territorial waters. Damien, you mentioned it. It's first off, is it the right fish? If you don't have a quota for the right fish, you've got to toss it back, even if it's dead. Is it too small? You got to toss it back. Is it too big? You got to toss it back. Are you over your quota? You got to toss it back. It's a huge waste. It's horrible for the environment, and we have to share our own waters. Which, as an island home, it's one of our great natural renewable resources. Our island home, we've always been a fishing people, and we've got to share that with other countries, which it just doesn't seem fair. I mean, if you take Iceland, use Iceland as a fantastic example. Iceland, and we fought the Cod War, and we may have lost, but we'll look over that. Yes, only war we've ever lost, but don't look into that claim. Iceland,
right up to our beaches. Yeah. I'm just saying, they have to fish up. They're allowed to fish right up to our beaches.
Absolutely.
Is the audio okay? Just wondering.
No, I think it's me. If I'm talking, I can't hear other people. So just pretend I'm a deaf grandpa or something. What Iceland does, which is fantastic, is it has a 200-mile exclusion zone where only it is allowed to fish. So within on all of their coins, there's some sort of fish. Now that's probably not the smartest idea in the world. And if all you've got, is fish, then perhaps Anyway,
we should absolutely have something like that.
Precisely. We should have an economic exclusion zone where we can provide for our people. We can grow our fisheries. This is an industry which we should be leading Europe in, and we're massively behind.
And also deregulate industry in general, because what the EU have done with all their regulations, they're making it virtually impossible for small and medium-sized British businesses to succeed, because they're competing against these giant multinational corporations and they have no chance. So we're going to be so much better economically outside of the EU. And I'm so confident that Britain has a prosperous future ahead.
And what's brilliant is, even if you disagree with that and you love regulation, you want more of it and more health and safety jargon and all that stuff, because you're taking back control, you can make that up. So actually, elections will mean something. So let's say you're hugely into regulation, you can put forward a candidate who can actually do something about that. Let's say you want to reduce VAT. At the moment, you can't do that. Whereas when you have somebody in power who has complete control, well, obviously they'd be regulated with checks and balances. That does sound quite bad, someone with complete control. But we'd be able to decide our own independent destiny without having bureaucrats who are entirely unelected governing and saying which direction we have to go in.
And that's what it's about. It's about being able to be masters of our own destiny.
Freedom.
Woo!
And this is partly why our steel industry is actually going bust at the moment, because we can't intervene because of the EU's rules on intervening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hope to see the British steel industry once again grow and flourish, which can only happen if we're outside of the EU. And it's getting even worse now. Now they're saying that in pursuit of, climate change, they're going to basically eradicate all industries that could possibly harm the environment, which is, going to directly affect us. This is complete nonsense.
The steel we were making steel is not all the same. There are very low, crappy steel, basically, and there's very good steel. We are making some of the best steel in the world, and you need high quality steel for certain industries. Beautiful steel. Exactly. And because we can't step in, and because we can't act in what they'd call an uncompetitive manner, we cannot save our steel industry. And steel, historically, and I think even now, is a strategic resource. So even if you are losing money, which there's no reason why we'd need to, even if as a country we are losing money, it's so important that we are making our own steel. If there's a war, if we suddenly need to produce a lot of something or other, you need to have steel. It's the same as this. Let's say, for example, you could get cheaper food from abroad on all of your products, and you could feed everybody in the country. Would you honestly give up your entire farming in your country just for slightly cheaper food? Of course you wouldn't. You want your farmers to be employed. You don't want everyone to be on benefits. And if that food resource suddenly cuts off, you don't want your whole country to starve. You want to, I think, my sort of inspiration behind this whole thing is I want Britain to be self-sufficient. I want us to be self-proud, self-encouraging, self-defiant, and self-sufficient to at least a certain degree. We shouldn't be depending on somebody else for our security, our intelligence, our this, our that.
Defense.
Be proud.
The most basic things, and we have no control at the moment. And if we were to stay, we'd eventually have to sign up to an EU army, which I mean, if our forefathers and our ancestors who fought in 2 horrific world wars to protect our freedoms could see what has happened to Britain and how we're being dominated by Germany again, their sacrifice. This is
exactly.
That's
for our freedom.
That's actually.
Go on,
sorry, Sebastian. I was going to say that's actually the argument I use to people who go, why did you vote Brexit? And I go, well, actually, I kind of feel like, our ancestors fought 2 horrible, bloody wars to gain our independence. So I kind of feel that maybe we should keep that independence.
Yeah.
And that usually sends them quite silent, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And earlier, Sebastian was talking about cheap food and stuff. Well, once we leave the EU, well, being part of the EU has meant we've completely left the world of cheap food. And once we leave the EU, we will be able to have cheap food, because instead of having to prioritize France and Germany and European countries, we'll open our markets to the rest of the world, which is a huge benefit of finally taking control of our trade and being able to form our own trade deals. And the first step is leaving the EU.
Absolutely. And the argument I hear so often about that is, if you open the borders to the world of cheap food, then your national agricultural sector will just go out of business. Hogwash. What we can do is, when we're in charge, when we have control, we can subsidize our farmers as much as we need. So when we want to have our own milk being produced, we can subsidize it. And people may hear subsidize, that means the government's paying for it. Just wait. We are giving the EU every year, I think it's 16 or 18 billion, of which we only get 6 or 8 of that back. So 10 billion a year is going to the European project, European projects, and other European countries. A fraction of that 10 billion could be used to subsidize our farmers. Our farmers, the idea that Brexiteers hate farmers is just ridiculous. I mean, it really is. Most farmers are Brexiteers, I'd say.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, all the propaganda on television by BBC where they, you know, talk to farmers who are supposedly pro-EU. It's just absolute nonsense.
Yeah, because when we actually talk to actual like fishermen farmers, they were all Brexiteers. You know, and obviously the BBC is biased, it's pro-Remain. They're never going to
show the truth.
Yeah, the truth, basically.
So going back to the Brexit Party, do you think after Brexit, the Brexit Party will basically adopt a sort of Farageist view of politics? Do you think it will kind of be built around Farage's politics?
Well, it will definitely be democratic in the sense that I think a lot of people will have a say in policy, and it won't just be Farage. But
in the end, it's those parties.
Well, but you know.
So do you think the current structure is temporary then? Because my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that there isn't like a national executive body. There's not like a council inside. It's almost Farage's way or the highway. Is that going to stay, or do you think that's temporary?
Firstly, it's only a couple of weeks old. You know? So we, you know, it's such a new party. They haven't been able to establish, you know, for you know, councils and branches and everything. But we will. And we will represent the people's voice, because the Brexit Party is ultimately formed of people from all walks of life who are united upon one thing, which is love for our country. And I think when you've got that fundamental shared value, then everything will stem from that, which will benefit our nation.
And on the topic of the sort of Brexit Party manifesto, or I think Farage wants to call it a list of promises, because he doesn't like the word manifesto leaves a dirty taste in his mouth. Let's almost talk about identity politics here. As people in your position, you know, what do you think people your age would like to see in that manifesto? What are let's give me 3 areas which somebody in your position would like to see from the Brexit Party manifesto.
Well, I think freedom of speech is something that's hugely important, especially now, and with the internet censorship and things that are happening recently. You know, even boys in my class are beginning to wake up and realize, you know, wait a minute, something's seriously wrong, especially when the EU trying to pass Article 13. That really, you know, woke up a few people in my year. So that's definitely one area. Possibly educational reform. I'd say also less corporatism. That's a huge. And I think everyone can see that high streets nowadays are just dominated by these big multinationals, Starbucks, and in almost every single small town all over the United Kingdom, you have these, you know, globalist corporations, and you no longer see small British businesses or family-run businesses. It's really sad.
So there needs to be an encouragement in school. There needs to be a real focus in school away from this sort of, you get these qualifications and then you find a job. There's no teaching on how to be an entrepreneur. There's no teaching on how to think entrepreneurially. It's just, we're going to mold you into something. You will work for some global corporation. You will do their bidding, and then you retire at 85. You know, there needs to be some sort of emphasis and some sort of teaching on, first off, how to pay taxes. I mean, it's a bloody nightmare. And then how to run a business, where to buy produce from, how to support yourself. This focus on becoming a soulless computer dweller for some corporation that doesn't care about you is so unfulfilling.
It's complete indoctrination of the youth. I've seen it firsthand. And so to speak. Also, another policy area which we forgot to mention was probably the environment.
And lots of people in our generation really care about the earth and stuff, but instead of talking about climate change, I think banning plastic should definitely be
pursued by the
Brexit Party. But I think mainly freedom of speech for me. The UKIP party right now is really big on freedom of speech. And that's something which I think is really important. And Nigel has already mentioned it, which is quite disappointing.
Another thing
sorry, Damien, I've talked too much. Go ahead, Damien.
Another thing which is slightly personal to me, which I would like to see a big improvement on, is we used to be really good at the government used to be really good at funding apprenticeships and really getting young people, especially from poorer backgrounds, that little step up and really get them into good jobs where they can actually earn a good living, get a house, get on in life. And the funding for apprenticeships has just dropped in recent times. And I've seen this because I actually applied for an apprenticeship recently, which hopefully I'll get, fingers crossed. And a lot of them were saying that you know, I've been struggling to find apprenticeships. This was to be an electrician. Like some people have traveled like 50 miles just to go for an interview. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. And you know why? I'm almost 100% sure that's because of all the cheap labor that's now available in the UK because of being in the EU. And you know, now it's getting so hard to find for young people to find jobs when there are, you know, thousands of others who will be paid less. That, you know, the only group that are that benefit from mass immigration are multinationals and corporations. And that's, you know, I find it so strange that the left can't understand that. That, you know, they advocate mass immigration because they want to just virtue signal, but the truth is they're siding with the corporations and the multinationals and globalists. So.
And the one thing you'd think the left would really be for, they'd really emphasize for, is the fact that when you have this mass immigration, especially of skilled people, you're robbing these developing countries of some of the most talented people. The argument's often made that the NHS wouldn't survive without all the doctors we get from Europe and developing countries. Do you not think those developing countries who don't even nearly have the welfare or the health and safety standards we do you not think they need doctors? Do you not think they need intelligent, educated people? The reason they're not developing as quick as us is we're taking a lot of their very brightest and best. That's theft, you know? That's theft.
Yeah, I actually read something recently about, I think it was Romania, that is really suffering because all its young people are coming here because there's, you know, better opportunities here. And, you know, all these immigrants come here to benefit from our hard-won freedom and all the assets we have. And obviously, I think immigration is a good thing. Generally, we should, you know, allow people to come and to contribute to our nation, but it needs to be controlled because at this rate, this is not sustainable, you know?
Well, we actually have about 500,000 people coming to this country every year now, which is really unbelievable. Around sort of that's not the net figure. That's the actual figure of people coming. Obviously, there's people leaving as well. But before Tony Blair, really, it was nowhere near that. It was something like 100,000, maybe. So
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands, exactly. So
it was tens of thousands until like 2004, when the EU expanded and a lot of the former communist countries suddenly became members of the EU and could move freely. And since then, I don't want to be called out on this, but there's an Eastern European country whose population has literally gone down because, I mean, imagine you're, I think it's Poland, it might be Romania or Bulgaria, but imagine
it's not Estonia, actually.
I'm not sure, but one of the former Eastern European, one of the former Soviet countries. Imagine you're in their position where the minimum wage is 1/10, and this is not an exaggeration, it might even be more, 1/10 of what it is in the UK. So if you do the exact same job you were doing in Romania, Bulgaria, whatever, you do the exact same job in Britain, which there are no barriers to stop you going there, you would get a 10 times pay rise. Any logical person in the world would do that. If I could do the same job in America for 10 times pay, I would think very, very seriously about doing that. So it's never anything against the individual immigrant because it's purely a logical decision. It's against the government policy of open doors mass immigration with no thought, no appreciation, no consideration for people at the bottom whose wages will stay stagnant. Why on earth would you pay someone above what you absolutely have to? And when these people are willing to work at the minimum wage, I think this is a phrase used by Nigel, the minimum wage becomes the maximum wage. The house prices, when there's more people in the country, you need to live somewhere. That's going to drive up demand. That's going to drive up price. Our social services, many people who haven't paid into the system are using it. And even that, even if they are paying it in, and even if the argument is that they pay in more than they take out, when more and more people are using these things, there has to be a breaking point. And that's why I'm so passionate about this issue. It's never against the individual immigrants. Never against it. It's against the system of mass migration.
You're quite a good speaker, Sebastian. You should be a politician.
Well, there is a leadership election coming up. Who knows?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It should be a privilege to come to Britain, I think. And also another huge thing which isn't happening is integration.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because, you know, my mother came here when she was to study her A-levels, from Peru, and you know, she loved Britain so much. She still loves this country so much, and she's, you know, she's such a patriot, which is amazing, and that seems to have completely disappeared. And instead, people, you know, people don't love Britain who are coming here.
Absolutely. And I get this feeling, actually. I've spoken to a lot of people, especially running for councillor. I've had to speak to people at their houses and things, that there is this feeling that we've lost something, and we need to go back to sort of a time when, you know, things were more common sense in a way. And I've spoken to like a veteran, and I thought I was one of the few people who thought this way, but so many people have this feeling like we've kind of lost something. And one of the things I find quite interesting actually with you is you have a sort of a bit of a swinging 60s kind of vibe going on.
And we love the 60s. We love the culture of the 60s and the music.
And that sort of reminds you of a time when Britain was sort of more assertive and confident in itself. And so I kind of find it kind of interesting that you kind of give off that vibe. It's kind of perfect in a way. I don't know if it's on purpose or it's just a happy coincidence.
Oh, thank you so much.
But is it just because you genuinely just like 60s culture and things like that, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beatles, we're huge fans of the Beatles and the Kinks and the music from the 60s, and also the fashion. And we collect vintage clothes from the 60s and stuff. And you know what's great? It's that they're all made in Britain.
Yeah.
You know, almost all clothes nowadays are made elsewhere, whether it be China or you
Bangladesh.
Yeah. Gosh. Yeah, it's a shame. So, you know, maybe in the future, once again, more things will be manufactured here.
And Damien, you talk about this old attitude from the 60s where we're more assertive and more proud of ourselves, I guess you could say. I think a large part, and there are many factors, I think a large part of that is this whole political correctness we've got at the moment. So many people are afraid to be given this term of racist or sexist or whatever it is, that they hold their tongue. It's the silent majority who hold their tongue because they don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to, you know, basically get themselves evicted by losing their jobs. It can be so tough. I always think of it as, it's sort of like saying someone has lice. Someone doesn't need to have lice to be accused of having lice. And the second someone says you have the lice, no one associates with you because they don't want lice themselves. Why on earth would you hang out with a genuine racist, somebody who genuinely hated someone purely for the reason that they were born a different skin color? That sort of person you don't want to be part of, you don't want to be friends with. But this sort of inflation of swear words that you inflation of homophobia and sexism and all these terms, it almost gets to the point where when somebody's called a racist, you just ignore it. And even if it's somebody on the street and they might genuinely be an actual racist, you just ignore it and you go, well, it's probably overused, it's fragrant. And if that person's a genuine racist, I want to know. I don't want to go near that person. So
that's so true. That's so true. What the left have done, they've degraded these words, which are supposed to actually mean something very serious, by throwing them around all the time. And you know, it's unbelievable. I saw a tweet the other day, someone, you know, calling all Brexit Party supporters Nazis, and I just thought, you know, it's so ridiculous. It's childish, and you know, nowadays people just roll their eyes.
When I see that, I just have to wonder, do they know what the Nazis did? I mean, you can make an argument that Brexit parties don't like this, or you can make an argument they don't like that. But the Nazis were so much. I don't even need to go into it. But making that comparison they were pretty bad. Yeah, that the comparison is so diabolic. I think it's even insulting to some Jews. It really is, or Germans, or anybody really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Respect. And you know, going back to what's happened nowadays with this complete erosion of our national identity and patriotism, that is, I think, mainly because of the EU and its agenda, and the fact that, you know, before British people, we were all united under values, and you know, that's completely erased from modern society. You know, even just, you know, basic conservative values such as, you know, the family unit and things like that. No, you know, you won't get our political class talking about that and how important it is that, you know, people still believe in the family.
And going back to what we were talking about with political correctness and people, you know, calling names, etc. Whenever the BBC writes an article and says, you know, this right-wing extremist, this right-wing extremist party, I immediately go, I bet that's not, no, sorry, far right. I bet that's not far right. I bet they're just calling that far right, just because that's how crazy we are now. We'll just call anything far right.
Yeah, but if anything, that's very intolerant.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it really instills fear in lots of people, because it's like sort of communist Russia, when neighbors started calling each other names and stuff, to not be called that, like
denouncing each other.
Yeah, denouncing each other, exactly. And that's really what's happening now. Everyone is calling each other Nazis. Just a virtue signal, really, and it's just ridiculous because they're just diluting these words' meanings.
Yeah, especially when if you look at people like David Lammy, they are the extremists.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
I bet he does incite hatred when he speaks.
Yeah.
And terrible white people helping Africans. How dare they?
And these people come from a place of hate, and you can see that because they're so hateful, and you know all they do is spout vile nastiness. And we're the ones who actually, as I said, come from a place of love for our country, love for its people, and respect for our ancestors and, the freedoms that they fought for in the world wars.
Rule Britannia.
Yeah.
I remember actually, as I was researching your Twitter feed, I saw a tweet which said something about the Communist Party actually using this strategy of just calling people names, even though that doesn't describe them properly, just to basically further their cause. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk a little bit more about Nigel Farage, since you are quite close to him, I understand. What is he like to be around as a person, and what do you make of him in particular?
I'm sure you met him as well, right?
Sorry?
You both have met him too, right?
I haven't met Nigel, no. I know Sebastian has. He's had a pint with him, but I haven't, no.
Yeah, 18th birthday, first legal pint. Beat that.
He's really passionate about what he's in, and I really trust him to deliver Brexit if he ever gets in power.
Yeah, I'm sure he will. And yeah, he's really funny and charming and just
Is he quite like how you see him in front of the cameras, or does he sort of mellow down at all? Because he's quite a passionate person, isn't he? Obviously.
Yeah. No, he's wonderful.
Okay, so I have our next topic lined up. I thought we'd talk a little bit about the drug scandal going on with the Tories at the moment, because I think it's quite hilarious.
Yeah.
So just to give some background, we've had Esther McVeigh come out saying that she smoked cannabis as a student. We've had Michael Gove and Boris Johnson both say that they've taken cocaine. Michael when he was a journalist, and Boris when he was at uni.
Yeah.
And we've also had Rory Stewart come out as smoking opium.
That's such a Rory Stewart drug, isn't it? I mean,
typical Rory, so hardcore.
I think what Esther did is fine. There's a huge difference between cannabis and cocaine.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I'm sorry, but I think what bothers me the most about Michael Gove and his, former coke habit, but we don't really know if he's the hypocrisy of creating policy banning any 23-year-old teacher who perhaps had a bad experience in his teenage years from becoming a teacher because he wanted coke, and yet as a professional journalist when he was in his 30s taking coke at dinner parties. I don't approve.
Well, so you're saying that
excludes them from the running? Do you think it's enough to kick them out?
Well, it's difficult because I think that the majority of Britons and the majority of Conservatives, in fact, would never take a Class A drug and do not support drug taking in general. So I don't know if I would feel happy that our Prime Minister possibly takes coke. If not,
So you're telling me you don't think the potential leader of our country should be a coke addict? Is that what you're saying? Quite controversial view, I think. I'm not sure. I apologise to anyone who heard that.
I think actually a lot of people feel the same way. You know, a lot of people think, you know, I've never taken Class A drugs, so why should our Prime Minister have done that? And
absolutely.
yeah.
And does Michael Gove actually support, making drugs illegal, or does he support, because it'd be quite funny if he does support keeping them illegal.
Yeah. I'm not sure. All I know is that he did make a policy that banned any former coke addicts from becoming teachers. So I don't think he's
really
drug use. Yeah, exactly. And also, it's such a bad example to the youth of our politicians. Are drug addicts or former drug addicts.
It almost seems like they were boasting about it. Hey, look at me! I take drugs. I'm just like you. It's like, yeah, we don't take drugs.
Young people.
State of Britain, where now we have politicians flaunting about their drug use. I just am not happy.
How far we've fallen.
Yeah, it seems like if you take coke, then you've got the youth vote in the bag, according to them.
Well, one of my favourite politicians of all time, Tony Benn, and he was such an honest man of integrity, and you don't see that anymore.
That's interesting that you mention a Labour politician as one of your heroes, because not many people might expect that, and it just sort of proves that it's about the cause rather than the partisanship.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think originally actually Brexit was a movement from the left, and until the left suddenly became these virtue signalling snowflakes, and yeah.
Because old Labour used to be so patriotic. I mean, you look at Tony Benn, you look at other people like him. Oh, who was the chap that did the incredible speech at the Oxford Union? It's on every montage.
Tommy Robinson? I'm just kidding.
I can't remember his name, but old Labour used to be so patriotic, and it was about our workers, and perhaps their economic strategy was left a bit to be desired, but they cared about this country. And it seems now to a lot of people that New Labour's draft is not so much care about the working man. It's sort of used the working man as a pawn to further international aims, and that's very worrying.
That's so true. And one thing Tony Benn said, which I completely agree with, is that on a kind of different subject of national laws, the further national laws are made from the nation, the weaker democracy becomes. So, this is I
think another one he said was, if you can't vote out the people in charge, you no longer live in a democracy, which is absolutely spot on.
True.
We never vote Bianca.
Yeah.
I see. During the European elections, I saw so many people on my Facebook saying, "Oh, we're voting in that undemocratic EU," then thinking they're the smartest people in the world. You're not voting for the people who really pull the strings. You're voting for the people who effectively rubber stamp it. Those people who you're voting in have no way of proposing legislation, no way of granting legislation. All they do is say yes or no, and almost entirely, if the Commission says we're doing this, if the Commission says jump, the Parliament says how high. The real power is in the Commission, it's in the Council, it's in the Council of Ministers, and it's in the ECB if it's part of the Eurozone. And all of those are completely unelected, which is worrying.
The Parliament is the most powerless Parliament in the world. And every time I see an FD on Twitter saying, well, at least we're having elections, it doesn't the Commission are the ones that initiate legislation, and they initiate all legislation completely in secret, which is something that really, should strike everyone as unbelievable.
And of course, we don't vote for the commissioners, do we? So we don't vote for the people who make the laws, which is basically fails a basic parliament straight off the bat.
And for a parliament with such little power, it's so expensive. I mean, a huge amount of their budget goes to their salaries are absolutely crazy. They get travel allowance, eating allowance, personnel allowance, oysters allowance, all these things. It's ridiculous. It really is.
One of my
It's a gravy train.
One of my Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, what angers me the most about this is that this is the hard-earned money coming from, the peoples of Europe, and yet it's being spent on Juncker's salary and his wine, and that just, that isn't right.
His many glasses of wine, yes.
Yeah.
One of my favourite things they do actually is they actually get all the belongings of the MEPs from Brussels, and they put it on a train and they take it all the way to Strasbourg in France, just so they can do more parliamentary work.
It's it needs to change. Our United Kingdom should no longer be governed by a group of unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats who we have no power to remove and are therefore unaccountable.
And I think that's a fantastic argument against this idea that we should stay in the EU to reform it, when the founding principle and the internal structures are completely based on the idea of unaccountability. I mean, the books haven't been audited in nearly 30 years. When the entire thing is undemocratic, when the institutions are undemocratic, when everything is aimed away from the individual and the individual nation states' ideas, and it's towards the sort of collective where, so what if 20% of people really, really hate this idea? We're pushing it through anyway. This idea that we as one country, not even the largest, and only having, 11% of the influence, I just think it can't happen. And that's why we need to go our own way. We need to control our own affairs. We need to be in control of our own destiny. And that's what Brexit's about. It's choosing our destiny. And as I said earlier, if you want to go down the, let's say, the left-wing route, we can do that. And we can nationalise the railways if we want to. Jeremy Corbyn could not do that if he was in the EU. If we want to, I don't know, anything else, if we have control, we can do what we want. It's about freedom. Who's against freedom? Come on.
Yeah.
Fascists.
Yeah. EU is completely unreformable.
Yeah. People who work there have said so, like Marta Andreasen, she was the EU's chief accountant, and she spoke about the corruption that she witnessed there in a book she wrote called Brussels There, and just how many millions of our taxpayers' money goes to waste every year.
Goes completely missing. She found between 2000 and 2001, 200 million euros.
Yeah. And even as chief accountant,
completely.
She had no power at all.
To change. Yeah.
Wow.
It was truly shocking. And, and the main problem with the EU is the fact that it is not an intergovernmental organization. It isn't governments working together as, they want to peddle. That isn't what it is. It's supranational. It is a group of unelected bureaucrats ruling over the countries of Europe who aren't elected. So, this whole idea that it's us all cooperating together, I would love that. I would love a Europe of sovereign nation states working together, trading together. But that isn't the EU. The EU is not Europe. It is a separate entity which has mounted a takeover. Yeah, exactly.
There's actually
Nowhere
a famous.
Else sorry, go ahead, Damien.
There's actually a famous Russian dissident who said one of the most perplexing things for him is the EU and Europe's attempt to recreate the Soviet Union.
That's basically where we're headed. Especially censorship. And what's shocking is that even now there are various websites that I found I can't access because I'm in the European Economic Area. I was trying to look at something. I mean, I'm sure if you can type it up, it'll happen to you as well. I was trying to type up something to do with, globalism and Hillary Clinton and the global government, and I was banned access from it. It's unbelievable.
It's just really suspicious as well.
It is. It makes. I showed it to people in my school. I said, have you tried to access this website? And it's so boring.
Sebastian, do you want to start getting up some comments from the feed?
I've had a look. We'd invite everybody now. If you're watching the feed live, please do put a question in the comment, because we've had a couple, but we've relatively answered them. So if you do have a question which you'd like us to talk about, please do send it in now, and I'll get it and I'll ask it.
Yeah. Before we do that, though, I wanted to ask you quickly. You've been quite supportive of Carl Benjamin, aka Sargon of Akkad. How did you get to meet him, and what do you think of him in general?
Oh, he's a great guy. I really, really do support him.
We first met him outside Parliament, where he wanted to interview us,
and then and then from then we got in touch with him, and we saw how the mainstream media were trying to smear him completely, and and
and made up so many
rumors about him and lies and twisting his words, and
And it seems like there's a bit of a free speech movement spearheaded by Carl Benjamin, but also obviously people like Jordan Peterson and who else? There's plenty of them around, but I'm struggling to think off the top of my head.
Sam Harris. Dave Rubin, obviously.
Dave Rubin, yeah. So do you keep up with a lot? It seems like you keep up with a lot of these people and are quite interested in this movement. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Freedom of speech is the most important and fundamental liberty we have. And once that starts being eroded, as it has been with these hate speech laws and discrimination, where we're being stopped from saying what we want to say and doing what we want to do, I think that's very concerning.
Okay, Sebastian, do you have questions ready? Because I've got two I can give you in the meantime.
I can't find any questions, so go ahead. But I just wanted to add on to what was said. I think the reason Sargon's done so well and got so many people behind him is not because he had a bunch of subscribers before they started. It's because he was unapologetic and he didn't back down. When they went for his family, when they went for his livelihood, when they went for his character, when they went for his life, he didn't give up and he didn't say, I'm sorry, and he didn't relent. He said, no, you know what? You are wrong. I am right. You do not have the moral higher ground. You are not my judge. And you haven't seen that before in politics. So often in politics, it's so much easier just to try and sweep it under the carpet. And maybe for a couple of days in the media, you're called silly words, but you've apologized. So it goes away eventually. But Carl's, he's determined, he's willing. You know what? You can attack me. You can attack my family. I don't like it, but what I'm fighting for is so much more important than just me. It's the free speech of everybody in the country. I mean, Damien and I know a person from Young Independents who was kicked out of their university for sharing his opinion. And it wasn't even a particularly controversial opinion, but he was kicked out of his university. That should not be happening.
It was about halal meat.
Country. It was about halal meat. Yeah. Basically kicked out of vegan.
And just so everyone's aware, that is the University of Central Lancashire, I believe. So don't go to that uni.
UCLan, yeah.
UCLan, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's terrible.
But we have some good news. Am I allowed to say this, Sebastian?
I think keep it private for now.
Okay, I'll keep it private. But yeah, we've got some ideas. But
we take care of our own.
we look after our own. Put it that way. Okay, so before we move on to the YouTube questions, I actually have a couple questions which I can fire at you right now from YI, which is the youth wing of UKIP.
Yeah, great.
Actually, I've just realised I've already asked the Carl Benjamin one. So thanks, Jacob, for that. What's your favourite takeaway, Indian or Chinese?
Hard. Oh, that's so cool. I love both. Maybe I feel like you can be up for it. I mean, they're both amazing.
We love Japanese food too.
Yeah.
Japanese. That's interesting.
Ramen soup is really good.
What about you, Sebastian? What's your favourite takeaway?
You caught me off guard. I wasn't prepared to answer such difficult questions. I like Indian's quite nice. I like a butter chicken, nice spicy. Well, sorry, not so spicy. Butter chicken.
Yeah. Okay, I think I'm going to have to go for Indian. So shout out to the Indians watching the stream. I know Ranveer Summon, I know you're watching, so shout out to you. Do we have any YouTube questions, Seb?
I have had a look and I really can't see any. Yeah, I've got somebody who's just asked again, Chinese or Indian question, a bunch of other ridiculous questions, but we have got a good one here from Jerome. I'm not even going to try and pronounce your second name, but Jerome has said, what are your thoughts on the BBC? You did touch on this earlier, but if you could just expand, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, hi Jerome. Thank you for your comments on my Twitter, by the way. I really appreciate them. So with the BBC, I think, obviously they are a completely biased organisation. And what's even worse is that they still claim to be impartial.
Yeah.
Which is pretty unbelievable considering they're basically just propaganda. And I think what's worse is that we still pay a license fee, a TV license fee, which I don't anymore. We don't pay anymore. But people still do, and now they're trying to impose it on
over 75.
Yeah, which is unbelievable.
What I think is really worrying about this whole situation is I hate the BBC. I really, really hate the BBC. Some of the things they do which aren't news are okay. Like Doctor Who 5 years ago was all right. It's not any good anymore, but I mean, 5 years ago it was quite good. And a few other shows. The problem I have is, although I'd love to get rid of the sort of news section because it is so horrendously biased, I fear that when you got rid of that, you'd effectively get rid of the whole BBC. And I wouldn't even mind that, especially. And I didn't really have a dog in the fight until I watched the pensioners complain about losing their license, having to pay a license fee in the future. A lot of these people are horrendously lonely, and elderly loneliness is such a huge issue which isn't talked about. The idea of waking up day after day and perhaps your husband or wife has died, and you have effectively nothing to do and potentially no one to talk to. So having the BBC, something that they've grown up with, that they've known all their life, they can just sit in front of the TV and watch their heart's desire. And sometimes it's interesting, and sometimes it's educating. I think that sort of a service has to exist for them, but we've got to do something about the horrendously biased coverage on some of the news. I mean, what do you sort of say to that sort of thing?
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's so important that news once again becomes impartial, and that I think quality of programs also needs to
also generation, because lots of people our age are always on our phones, and then when they read the news, it's biased, and
lots of people are very misinformed, especially with the whole Project Fear.
Yes.
Almost every young person in my school was saying how leaving on no deal would be catastrophic.
So you're quite adamant for no deal, aren't you? Obviously. So why do you think that no deal is the only real option now, as opposed to maybe getting some sort of deal?
The EU isn't going to negotiate with us. They want May's withdrawal agreement.
The
really
European treaty.
And it's disgraceful. We can't. That's not a real Brexit. So I think the only option for us is to leave without a deal.
And I'm so confident that we will be able to survive and then even thrive on WTO terms. And I just realised we're on 1%. So
right. Jolly good. While you're doing that, what I really want to sort of expand on is we've talked about the BBC, and that's a huge issue. One of the other issues that you're seeing at the moment with online free speech and freedom of expression is it is coming from the corporations rather than the government. Now, the BBC is obviously partially governmental, but also there's a sort of separation of powers there. But what's essentially an entirely corporatist, the way that free speech is being eroded via only corporations is when you see with Facebook and Twitter and things like that. There's a huge argument going on at the moment between about censorship and what you should and shouldn't be able to say. And I'm sure you've looked into it a great deal, or at least you've heard about it. What is your sort of view? Because there's a view that we should sort of break down Twitter into various other things. We should regulate it. We should let them do what they want. Where do you sort of fall on the spectrum?
Well, we think that if these giant tech companies are going to start acting as publishers, specifically choosing what they want to have on their website, then they should face the legal consequences of that. And they shouldn't be allowed to just ban people with a differing political opinion and instead promote diversity of thought. That being said, there are also news sites coming up like BitChute and Parler, which promote freedom of speech. So I'm sort of starting to move to those platforms. But it shouldn't be up to us to have to move. I think the government should definitely put pressure on these companies, the Trump administration, and even our government.
Especially because these companies are describing themselves as platforms rather than publishers, and so they have a duty to, allow people to speak freely.
Exactly.
And I think
I would recommend that everyone goes to Breitbart News and learns news from there, because they are a great news outlet. Highly recommend.
You have a podcast coming out with Dellingpole at some point soon, don't you? I think I saw a picture. Is that right?
No, we don't.
Oh, okay. I saw you pictured with James Dellingpole, so I presumed that you maybe did a podcast with him.
Oh no, we made a film with him that he's posted on Breitbart where he interviews us briefly, and it was amazing. It was at the Democracy rally in London with the Brexit Party. It was great.
Yeah, James Dellingpole is a really good journalist. Actually, I really enjoy his podcasts. I know that's by the by, but anyway.
Well, I think a good question's raised, and it's funny because when you mentioned migrating to BitChute, part of my brain just sort of thought you'd be migrating your channel, and then I remembered, of course, you don't have a channel. And then the next question was, why don't you have a channel? So in the future, will we see a Grant Sisters source or news feed or I don't know, comedy channel, or who knows? Will we see anything like that in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Why not?
Yeah, I was preoccupied with exams, but now I have this summer, so we can actually do one now.
We should. Actually, that'd be interesting. It would definitely be on BitChute because
you have to credit us with your new channel, obviously.
Us.
So we inspired you.
Us.
Yeah, we definitely do that. So everyone should stay tuned.
Fantastic.
I've been looking through the feed, and you're right, I haven't found many questions as such, but I have had a comment here which says one of the biggest problems we have is wage stagnation. The so-called average salary used to be enough to buy a house. Now houses cost 10 times or more than that figure.
It's a huge problem, and yeah, again, it's probably due to the EU and corporatism, and yeah,
and immigration, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Mass immigration, I should say.
We're a small island. We really don't have enough space, and instead of trying to solve the root of the issue, which is the influx of thousands and hundreds of thousands of migrants, our government wants to instead build on our beautiful English countryside, which isn't a solution at all. So
another thing I would like to see is obviously there's people suffering in the Middle East, like the Yazidis and people like that. I think there's nothing wrong with giving preferential treatment to, say, Christians in the Middle East who are suffering. I would like to see more attention paid to who we let in, as well as like defined by culture, as well as just, you know, have you got a degree and things like that.
And also true refugees suffering political persecution should of course be granted asylum, but that's not the case. Yeah. And I think what also really should strike everyone and should really concern everyone is that if you look to our European neighbours, you can see France and Germany suffering because of mass immigration. And we really, and you know, France at the moment with the Gilets jaunes, we really don't want that for our country, and that's the direction we're heading if this continues. So everyone should be concerned.
One good question I've just seen on the feed, which I don't think you've ever answered before, is do either of you see yourself with a future in politics, or is this sort of just something you've been caught up in, or is it something which you might have long-term ambitions in?
Yeah, well, we'd like to have a proper job first. Because
good.
I think it just depends. Yeah. I mean, politics, I think, is always going to be a huge part of my life because it's, you know, it's the most important thing, really. Yeah. And I love my country very much. So, you know, but if we are able to leave, and if, you know, I think, yeah, I mean, it's difficult.
I suppose it's something you just have to see about, really. I mean, if you said now, yes, we definitely want to be politicians, that's all we want to be, I mean, you'd effectively be career politicians, and we've got far too many of them. And part of the reason so many people love Nigel is he obviously always cared about politics and always cared about his country, but for him it was, I'm going to get a job, and it's only when I cannot take it anymore then I must do something about politics. It's not me wanting power, it's not me wanting money, it's me wanting to change the direction of the country.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think too.
Yeah, that's how
you need that motivation. You have to ask yourself, when you see a politician, the question I ask is, why are they there? Is it because their dad was a politician? Is it because they left university and became a special advisor immediately? Or is it because they really cared about these issues? You know what I mean? And you can clearly see that that was the case with Nigel. And although he's left us, I mean, I'll always have respect for him.
Yeah, I was going to say, so many politicians are so removed from life outside of London, and it's really such a shame because you can tell that they really don't know what's going on in other parts of the country. And when we went around for the Brexit march and everything, we could really see how other people are living. And
and what was shocking is that these people, their vote is the only thing they have, in the sense that they're only their voice. And it was just so heartbreaking to see how they're so angry that it's being betrayed, because these people, they live very modest lives, and just the fact that a group of Westminster career politicians are stamping all over their democratic vote.
Absolutely.
Shocking.
Okay, I've got another question for you. This is, apart from Nigel Farage, which other Brexit Party members do you admire?
Oh, so many.
Well, which ones do you like the most?
Also, Anne Widdecombe, of course, she's fantastic and such an inspiration to us, because she's such a powerful woman, and we love her. And so many. Where do I begin? Van Habib.
Did you get a chance to meet Anne Widdecombe on the campaign trail?
Oh no, unfortunately we didn't get to meet her in person, but maybe in the future. And I think the most incredible thing about the Brexit Party MEP candidates is that they're all such fantastic, successful people who really love this country and believe in what they're fighting for, which is something that politics has really lacked recently in the UK, which is people who aren't just there to become prime minister or career politicians driven by a hunger for power and money, but instead ordinary people who believe in something, who've worked hard their whole life and are prepared to give up, or not to give up, but to make a change to their lifestyle, to pursue.
They're sacrificing so much.
One of the things I find so fascinating is how the Labour Party used to really represent working class Brits, and you'd get working class Brits as candidates for the Labour Party, and it seems like they're so cosmopolitan, middle class, nothing compared to what they originally stood for, and I find that just incredible.
The Labour Party has completely abandoned the working classes. It's unbelievable, and I think this has been the case, I think, since Blair. It's really sad. Probably before Blair, but
I have a brilliant question here, which is why are you guys so patriotic?
Thank you. Well, for me, it's just because I think I feel so privileged to have been born in Britain. And we have such an amazing culture and history, and the best band in the world is British.
And we have so many amazing writers and artists as well.
Absolutely. From Evelyn Waugh,
Ian Forster, Nancy Mitford, Shakespeare, obviously.
And this is the coolest flag in the world. It is the coolest.
Definitely.
We're
a pretty stylish nation as well. Like we've given birth to a lot of interesting movements, whether it be mods, punks, and things like that. We're pretty inventive as a country, aren't we?
Completely, and the British people are so strong-hearted and strong-willed, and they are just the best. I mean, I think British character is something that I hope this country never loses, because during 2 world wars, which brought our country to its knees, people still stood up and fought, and whether on the front lines or at home, everyone, we saw true community spirit, and the true British spirit was kept alive the whole time. I'm just saying more of that.
I love
Stiff
going back
upper
to
lip.
the history books, and you see the pictures of the Blitz, and you see the people whose houses are being destroyed while the photo's being taken, and they're lying down in the tube, and they're singing songs, and they're playing games, and they've got smiles on their faces. If that happened today, my house is being destroyed, I haven't got any Wi-Fi connection, Bluetooth's not working, you know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. The character that was there, you absolutely hit the nail on the head. It's incredible.
It's the stiff upper lip.
Stiff upper lip.
And it worries me that we're losing that. That you know, with the internet.
Well, the thing I would the thing I would comment on that briefly is that I think that we do tend to think that these people in the media are more representative of the country as a whole, when in fact I feel like it's a minority who have really given us this political correctness and, you know, Britain is not a good thing kind of idea. I think if you traveled across the country, you'll find that that is quite a minority view. But the thing is, we're totally getting misrepresented by the media and things like that.
That's very true. There are so many young people who still feel patriotic and, you know, who love their country, love Britain. And, you know, as long as we still exist, as long as our voices can be heard, it's never going to die, this patriotism and love for our country. And, you know, eventually political correctness, you know, will bore everyone to death, because it's no fun in society where you can't say what you think and, you know, and you're too scared to offend someone. And I think what these people have done, you know, the people peddling the political correctness agenda, they have taken advantage of the British natural tolerance for others to make it so we now have to be, you know, almost now we become intolerant to people with other views. And I think diversity of opinion is one of the most important things, you know, so, and that's being raised by these people.
Well, there's actually studies been done, I think, where it's actually showing that Generation Z, or the Zoomers, as I like to call them, are actually a lot more sort of patriotic and right-wing than previous generations like millennials. So I think
wrong with millennials.
But I think like the work that people like Sargon are putting in is actually having quite an impact, and people like Paul Joseph Watson as well, really sort of sending that message through that, you know, Britain in the end is a good idea and we should be proud of ourselves, you know.
Probably just the fact they all drink soy. But you know,
our generation is really realizing that patriotism isn't extreme as the left
absolutely.
likes, you know.
Well, I think what happens, you know, this is what happens when you take away, or when you try to take away people's national identity. They will rise up and reclaim it, which is what the Brexit movement is, and what's happening all over Europe.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
I think there has been a vacuum in many young people's lives, and what Damien says, the polling data is very much in agreement with Damien here. I think a lot of people in this world with instant gratification, they've got their phones, they're losing connection and losing touch with their friends effectively, and with what being a child is all about. You know, people were expected to be adults by you know, by 18, you know, many years ago, or maybe even 16. Now, you know, you can basically be a child until you're 35, you know, because your parents are going to take care of you, the state's going to take care of you, whatever. The part of your life where you had to be self-reliant and self-dependent, and now when you see the playgrounds and when you see the areas that children inhabit, they're completely mollycoddled. There's foam everywhere. The idea of the speck of danger has been completely removed from so many aspects of life. People sort of feel like they haven't had a proper childhood. They've never risked anything. They've never almost done anything, and they feel this void of community. And so when they see people passionately standing up saying, I love this country and this country is part of me, it's part of my fiber, part of my being, I think that can and does appeal to so many people. The idea that we can all stand side by side, we can all be friends under one flag is just makes me feel all tingly.
No, that's so true, Sebastian. That's what patriotism is about. It's about, you know, it doesn't matter where you come from, what your skin color is, you know, or political ideology even. It's about standing under a flag and just loving your country. And I think that's such a good thing.
Yeah, and wanting what's best for it as well.
Well, well. I have two questions for you here, actually. What do you like most about Britain? And also, what is your favourite blend of tea?
Oh, that's such a difficult one. Wait, sorry, what was the first one?
What are you going to go for? The tea first or Britain?
Oh,
let's answer the two.
yeah.
Well,
so for me, it'd be probably Earl Grey.
Yeah.
Wow.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, Earl Grey's the best. It's just, you can't go wrong.
Do you ever go into sort of other teas, or is it Earl Grey every time of the day?
It's
Breakfast tea, yeah, it's classic.
Mm.
Gosh, there's so many.
I'm a big fan of rooibos. What do you think?
I don't think I've never tried that.
Or red bush, as it's sometimes called.
Oh, I don't think I've ever had that.
You're speaking
Never had that.
different language.
Oh, Damien, come on. Well, you're a working class geezer, so you just stick with breakfast tea, don't you?
PG tips, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really strong.
We have family in the north. So
well, it's a classic British tradition, the cup of tea, isn't it? So we need to preserve it and honour it, really.
Yeah, I mean, we've got our teacups.
Yeah.
Did you
the Scottish tradition?
Yeah.
Good bit of whiskey. Yeah.
Wow.
Who knows?
straight from the bottle, right, Sebastian?
No, you would never drink it straight from the bottle. I've got my little whiskey stand here, but maybe for another episode.
Yeah, we have family from all over Britain, Scotland, Ireland as well. Actually, probably not Wales, but maybe.
Am I right in thinking your dad is Scottish?
He's English, Scottish, and a bit of Irish blood as well.
Oh wow, that's quite a mixture.
Yeah, from all over the UK.
Okay. Well, I think maybe we can bring this stream to a close, unless you have anything you want to say particularly.
It's been really great talking to you too. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's great to have you on. I've been following you for a while, and yeah, I really, even though we come from different parties, we all want the same thing, and yeah, we should fight together in the trenches. And that's how it's got to be. Isn't that right, Sebastian?
Damien's absolutely right. He's hit the nail on the head, as he often does. What's so admirable is we're effectively in competing parties, but we can come together and we can discuss and we can talk. And this is how the political spectrum should really be. People from parties which are similar, parties which aren't similar, they come together and they discuss their differences. They talk amongst each other. They break bread. And so often at the moment, you don't see that happening. You see people tearing into each other, and there's no dialogue anymore. So can I just say, and I know I speak for Damien here, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you. We're fighting the good fight, and we'll never give up. And yeah, I'm very optimistic about the future. So yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay,
Great.
thank you. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.